Greetings, this is Mr. Kingsbury, and I wanted to talk to you today about domain and range. That's going to be our topic. Remember, this is the absolute value unit, and we are in Algebra 2. Don't forget to put your name at the top. Don't put my name, put your name, and then make sure you put the date and put whatever period is that you have me. Our essential question for the day is, how do I write domain and range in set, inequality, and interval notation? And I'm not entirely sure that that's the best English. I wasn't sure if it should be notation or notations, but we're going to go with what's there and pray for the best. So for starters, I need to help you understand what each of these are. You're probably most familiar with inequality notation, so let's start there. Let's see, inequality notation. It's going to have a starting and a start, so it'll be a start, and then there'll be a less than or equal to, and then some variable, and then a stopping point. It could also be less than or equal to, but it's always going to be set up that way. And I kind of owe you an apology because I believe we talked about just doing single inequalities, and that's really not going to cut the mustard. So from here on out, we'll use the double inequality every single time. Set notation is really just a dressed up version of inequality notation. It will have this piece, it'll have the inequality, but it will also have these fancy braces, and it will have the variable, and then it will have this line right there. This line means such that. And then it will have the variable again. And then it will have this funky symbol, which means is an element of. And then we'll have that, which means all real numbers. And then there'll be some inequality. And then a closed brace, like so. Lastly, we have interval notation. Interval notation. And that's actually pretty straightforward. There will be either a parenthesis or a bracket, all right? And then there will be something in here, some sort of number, if you will. So it'll be like number, comma, number. And actually what I should say is, much like the inequality notation, there will be a start and a stop. And then it will have a parenthesis. It could have brackets. Or it could have a mix. And I don't want to write out all of them, but you could have one and one as well. That happens also. So let me just give you a couple of examples. I think maybe 3 examples to show you, given one of them, how to get to the other. All right. And in class, we will practice more so that, we'll practice it as it applies to each family of functions. So actually, since we are on absolute value, I think I will just do a couple of examples of how to write it as it applies to absolute value for the most part. Okay, so example 1. Let's just do domain. So the domain is all real numbers. So the absolute value domain is always all real numbers. So that means then that it starts from negative infinity and it goes to positive infinity. So the inequality notation looks like this. We would start with negative infinity is less than x is less than positive infinity. Set notation looks just like this, but we're going to add some extra pieces. We would start with this brace. It makes it look fancy. I'm fond of saying that set notation is just inequality notation dressed up in its finest. So we'll start with the brace, and then we would write x, and then we will put this line here. This is x such that x is an element of all real numbers. I just hit you with a lot of that. That would be set notation. Now you could put a comma and then put this inequality, but it's redundant because as long as x is an element of all real numbers, that's all you need for the absolute value domain. So I'm going to go ahead and close it with the brace. X such that x is an element of all real numbers. And that brace looks just horrible. It's like it's been out in the Texas heat. And then we have the interval. And this one's actually probably the easiest. Remember, it's easiest to go from inequality to interval. It's going to start at negative infinity, and it's going to end at positive infinity. So I put negative infinity, comma, positive infinity. And infinities always get parentheses. Probably I should make a note up here under interval notation. The parentheses mean not included, and the brackets mean included. And what I mean by that is they are part of the domain or range. I like to explain it like this. At my house, I have a backyard, and the backyard has a fence. Now, either I own the fence or my neighbor owns the fence. Regardless of who owns the fence, that is the line between my property and his property. However, he could own it, in which case the fence is part of his property, or I could own it, in which case it's part of mine. Domain and range are the same. Whatever the kind of end place is, the starting or stopping points, if you will, they can be included in the domain or range or not. Regardless of whether they're included, they are the boundary of where it starts or stops. This will make more sense if we look at some range examples. So I'm going to flip the page and do some range examples. I guess 3 range examples. Let me draw my fabulous column first. There we go. So what I'll do is an example where I give you one and then we can write it in the other. So let's say that the range is, let's say I give you that it is negative infinity is less than y is less than or equal to 7. Okay. Remember that this will be based off a graph that looks kind of like this. The y value of the vertex would be 7. Why would I do that? Would be 7. So like, let's say that this vertex is 3, 7. I don't care about the x, but 7 is what goes here. Oops, I got that backwards. I have this completely backwards. It opens down. My apologies. It opens down like so. 3, 7, beautiful. So, ultimately, it starts down here in negative infinity, and it goes up here to 7. That's what this says, negative infinity to 7. As far as inequality notation is concerned, as it relates to absolute value, the number side will always have the absolute value, or always have the or equal to. The infinity side will always have just a straight less than. All right, less than, equal to. So how do we turn this into set notation? Pretty much you start with the brace and you put x such that x is an element in all real numbers. Then you put a comma and you copy this exact thing. Negative infinity is less than y is less than or equal to 7. It's pretty straightforward. You really just put this on the front there. Interval notation, actually also pretty easy because we know we're starting at negative infinity and we're stopping at 7. Infinities will always get a parenthesis because they can't be included because they go on forever. The number part for absolute value will always get a bracket because it will always be included because it will always be part of the vertex, which is included. So there's example 1. example 2, let's say that I give you set notation. Let's say that, here, we'll make a graph that goes up like this. Let's say the vertex is at 1, negative 2. So, and let's say, so for set notation, let's say that it is x such that x is an element of all real numbers, comma, and negative 2 is less than or equal to y is less than infinity. So we've got our little beginning part here, and then in this case, the inequality is really the important part. This says, hey, our y values start at negative 2 and go on into infinity and beyond, just like Buzz Lightyear. Now we need to put this in interval notation and inequality notation. That's really easy. I just need to copy this part for inequality. Negative 2 less than or equal to y less than infinity. And then interval notation. Again, negative 2 is where I start. Infinity is where I stop. Infinities always get a parenthesis, and the number will always get a bracket for absolute value. And then let me give you the hard one, and I'll explain why this is the hard one. So let's say that, let's just do another one that's going up. Let's say the vertex is, I don't know, negative 4, comma, negative 1. And let's say that I give you interval notation. So in this case, it's going to start at negative 1, and it will go up into positive infinity. Infinity always gets a parenthesis. The number will always get a bracket. That's not that big a deal. The problem is, if I were to just give you this, and I didn't tell you that we were dealing with the range, you wouldn't know if it was the range or the domain, because there's not an x or a y in here. So we have to be careful. I'm telling you it's the range, so we're going to go ahead and use y. And the next thing I would do then is inequality notation. And I would simply write less than y less than, and then these go on the outsides. Negative 1 here and infinity here. The number side will always get the or equal to. And then for set notation, we can start with our little brace and our x such that x is an element of all real numbers, comma, and then write this inequality. Negative 1 less than or equal to y less than infinity. And then close it with another brace. And that's a domain and range. We will continue to practice these with each family so that we can practice writing all the different notations. I am really sorry for that yawn. I hope you had a great day, and I'll catch you later. Bye.